All right, welcome back, guys, to Cincinnati Connection. Sharice Gibson here. After it was announced that Marvin Lewis would part ways with the Cincinnati Bengals, there were some fans who pushed for a statue for the longtime Bengals head coach. But given all the animosity towards the coach, some of you scoffed at that idea of honoring his legacy. But some, including Kevin Aldridge, who's the columnist with the Cincinnati Enquirer, believes that he deserves that statue, and so do others. He joins me this morning to talk about his latest column. Not only that, but the latest controversy of Cincinnati Police Department officers using racial slurs. That in a moment. But first, Kevin, your thoughts, a statue for Marvin Lewis? Yes or no?
It's not as crazy as it might sound. So here's where I came from, and the premise of my article is that really Cincinnati, not only does Marvin Lewis deserve a statue in Cincinnati, but so does Anthony Munoz, so does Ken Anderson, so does Chris Collinsworth, the great Paul Brown, who is one of the great innovators in professional football history. And when you look around our city, there are no real standing monuments to any of our great Cincinnati Bengals players. The Reds do a great job of acknowledging their history and the great players with their Hall of Fame. You know, you got the Joe Morgan statue out in front of the stadium. And so the Reds do a great job of paying homage to the players of the past and coaches of the past. Cincinnati Bengals, not so much. You know, outside of the name on the stadium, you know, there really isn't much in the way of sort of permanent acknowledgments of the great players. And so Marvin Lewis leaving in this statue discussion, in my mind, sort of opened up this idea of, yes, we do need to pay tribute to our great players and coaches. And if you do that, you can't really do that without acknowledging Marvin Lewis, who's the winningest head coach in Bengals history.
And I think people seem to forget that. I get that. I know that it's been a rough time. It has been a rough time. I have had the opportunity to sit down with Marvin Lewis and to talk about his legacy as one of only a few, which I want to get your opinion on this, only a few African-American head coaches in this country. So now that he is gone, that dwindles it down to what, maybe 2 or 3 head coaches, African-American head coaches?
In fact, there was an article that came out recently that sort of talked about on Black Monday when the NFL, you know, notoriously fires all of the coaches who were on the hot seat. A number of them were African-American coaches who lost their jobs. Wilkes in Arizona, Todd Bowles in New York, Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati, Vance Joseph in Denver. So right there, you've got a pretty good chunk of the diversity of black coaches in the NFL now suddenly gone in one day. Now, they may reload depending on how these 8 coaching vacancies get filled, but it does, you know, it is a reminder to how precious those jobs are and how few African-American coaches there are in professional football.
Yeah, well, I mean, tell me this. I talked about his legacy. We talked about what he had come from, what he had built, making this. When I think about Marvin Lewis, and maybe it's because I am, you know, I always tell to people I'm not the biggest football fanatic, so I don't know all of the stats, and so I won't even go into that. But he is the person who, for me, made this team relevant again.
Oh yeah.
So are we forgetting that?
I think, you know, there's a line from one of the Batman films that I love, and it's the prosecutor Harry Dent has a line. He says, either you die the hero or you live long enough to become the villain. And I kind of feel like that's what happened with Marvin Lewis. Is after the first, you know, 2 or 3 years in Cincinnati, really first 5 years in Cincinnati, if you had suggested building a statue to Marvin Lewis, people would have absolutely, you know, this guy deserves, you know, to be, you know, busted in Canton. You know, I mean, it was in Marvin we trust. People were high off of what he had done because they remember where Cincinnati was in the 90s. Well, sort of after that, Marvin Lewis had some ups and downs, wasn't able to win a playoff game. A couple of instances, he had Super Bowl worthy teams that were derailed by injury. Carson Palmer gets his knee shredded against the Steelers at home in 05. You've got Andy Dalton in 2015, breaks his thumb, you know, a couple of games before the end of the season. Those were 2 years where a lot of people thought the Bengals had a chance to make it all the way to the Super Bowl. So in a couple of instances, he was really snake bit by injuries, the meltdown against the Steelers in the playoff game. You know, some people want to lay that on Marvin Lewis's feet. I think there's plenty of blame to go around in that instance. So some bad luck, some unfortunate situations probably kept him from having at least a couple of playoff wins, and who knows what after that. So I think that, and then you got to remember, you know, the Brown family and how they run the Bengals organization is not like a traditional NFL franchise. And Marvin Lewis coached a lot of those teams with, one arm basically tied behind his back. And the fact that he was able to win with all of the challenges that fans know, that everybody around the league knows that comes with coaching in Cincinnati, I don't think it's not that people forget it, but I think they don't respect it enough.
All right, so we have about a minute left. I wanted to ask you quickly about this, your thoughts. We talked about the 2 police officers. I believe one suspended, both probably suspended for caught on camera, body camera, using racial slurs during the course of arrest. Your take on exactly just kind of the punishment, and you said that we need to take a look internally at, the police officers need to take a look at the culture of using the N-word.
Yeah, I think for me, there's no place for it in a professional environment. I think for me personally, I think it should be a fireable offense. Now, understanding that, you have to work within civil service, the union contract, past precedent, probably not reasonable to expect that in this particular instance. But I do think the city, the police union, the police chief need to come together and talk about moving forward. There needs to be a zero tolerance policy for this. No officer should be saying it. Nobody in any kind of professional setting should be using that kind of language or racial slurs of any kind. With police being under the scrutiny that they are, the perceptions that they are not impartial and treat African Americans unfairly, I don't understand how you can have individuals on your force who refer to people that they serve and protect as N-words. That's just incompatible with that mission in my mind. And so I think you have to have a zero tolerance policy for those sorts of things. And you make sure that you don't have a place in your department for those kinds of officers, because the toxic nature of it is unfortunately, it washes off on the good officers there. Because now, as I said in my column, now I have to wonder in every encounter, is this an Officer Barnett or an Officer Hill who's in their mind thinking about me as being an N-word? And that's not fair to all of the other cops. It's not fair to me as a citizen to have to deal with that. And it's not fair to all of the other cops on the force who conduct their duties without racial bias on a daily basis. And that's why I think, officers need to stand up and begin to start calling out, and saying that we're not going to condone this kind of behavior in our ranks. All
right, Kevin Aldridge with the Cincinnati Enquirer. Always good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, coming up, voter rights restored to felons in Florida, how this could change the way the Sunshine State sways.